Her husband pointed a finger at her right in the middle of the gala and warned, "Tonight, don't open your mouth." But just a few minutes later, in front of hundreds of guests, the most powerful billionaire in the room walked straight toward her, froze, and called her by name as if he had been searching for her his whole life. No one knew that this woman, the one her husband looked down on, had saved his life 28 years ago, and no one could have imagined that on that very night, a secret buried for years would be exposed, bringing down the proud man standing beside her. From that moment on, the glamorous party was no longer a place for wealth and appearances. It became the stage where a shocking truth finally began to come to light. The man who had just ordered her to stay silent had no idea that in only a few more minutes, he would be the one losing everything in front of the entire high society crowd. But before that shocking moment happened, no one in the ballroom understood why Claire Harper was even there. In a simple dark blue dress, a style already a few seasons old, she walked beneath the sparkling chandeliers like someone who belonged to a completely different world. Beside her, Daniel Brooks adjusted the buttons of his tuxedo and wore the perfect social smile, shaking hands and trading polished looks with everyone around him. To the guests, Daniel was the image of success, charming, accomplished, admired, and Claire, in their eyes, was just the wife who came along to complete the picture. The moment they stepped out of the car, Daniel leaned close to her, his voice low but cold enough to make it hard to breathe. "Just stand beside me, smile, and don't say a word. Don't embarrass me." It was not the first time Claire had heard something like that. For 25 years of marriage, she had heard the same message in different forms at business dinners, family gatherings, and luxury vacations she had never truly enjoyed. Daniel never needed to shout to control her. One look was enough, and Claire knew she was expected to stay quiet. She tightened her grip on her handbag and kept her face calm. No one could see the exhaustion sitting quietly in her eyes after years of being dismissed, interrupted, and turned into a shadow behind her husband's success. Claire used to have dreams. She used to have a voice. She used to be a woman who could decide her own life. But little by little, year after year, she had learned to make herself smaller just to keep the peace. And tonight seemed like it would be no different, until the grand doors of the ballroom opened, and the most powerful man in the room stepped inside. The entire ballroom seemed to fall silent for a few seconds when Ethan Caldwell appeared. He did not need to raise his voice or show off his power, yet every step he took made people move aside on instinct. As the new chairman of the corporation, and the man currently shaking the financial world with billion-dollar deals, Ethan carried the kind of presence that made everyone cautious. Important guests straightened their posture, ready with polite smiles, hoping to catch his attention. Daniel, meanwhile, seemed to transform into a different person. He quickly straightened his tie, placed a hand lightly on Claire's back as if playing the role of the perfect husband, and leaned in close to whisper a warning in her ear. "Remember, don't say anything." But what no one expected was that Ethan did not look at the major shareholders, nor did he stop by the circle of executives waiting to greet him. His eyes swept across the crowd once, and then suddenly stopped. His whole body went still. On the other side of the ballroom, Claire felt it too. She frowned slightly, not understanding why a man like Ethan Caldwell was staring at her so intensely, as if he had just seen a ghost from his past. Daniel immediately stepped forward with a wide, practiced smile, ready to take advantage of the valuable moment. But Ethan paid no attention to him at all. In front of hundreds of stunned eyes, the most powerful billionaire of the night walked straight toward Claire, step by step, slow and certain, until he stopped directly in front of her. Then, in a low voice that hardly anyone could believe, he spoke the name Claire had not heard in a very long time. "Claire Harper, is that really you?" At that very moment, Daniel's face stiffened, and Claire felt as if the ground beneath her had shifted, because she knew from the look in Ethan's eyes that he had not mistaken her for someone else, and the past she had buried so deeply might be about to rise again. Claire went completely still. Hearing the name Harper in the middle of that luxurious ballroom felt like a door being thrown open, dragging her back to a life she had tried to bury for decades. Her fingers tightened around her clutch until her knuckles turned white. Beside her, Daniel stood frozen, the smile on his lips already starting to crack because he had no idea what was happening. Around them, music still played, glasses still clinked softly, but in that moment, to Claire, every sound seemed to fade far away. Ethan could not take his eyes off her. His look was not one of social curiosity, nor the polite attention someone might give the wife of an employee. It was the look of a man who had just found a missing piece of memory he had been carrying for nearly 3 decades. He stepped a little closer, his voice lower now, as if speaking too loudly might make the moment disappear. "I've been looking for you for 28 years. Claire shook her head almost automatically. "I'm sorry. I think you have the wrong person." But Ethan only smiled faintly, without the slightest doubt. Austin. A rainy night. A car accident on the side of the highway. I was brought to the hospital with almost no chance of surviving. No insurance. No family there. No one wanted to take responsibility. But there was one young nurse who refused to let them give up on me. He paused, still looking directly at her. "Her name tag," said Claire Harper. A chill ran down Claire's spine. Old memories, faded by time, suddenly came back with painful clarity. The smell of antiseptic, the cold white light of the emergency room, blood spread across a young man's shirt, and her own trembling voice as she insisted the doctors had to save the life of a man no one else cared about. Daniel quickly cut in with an awkward laugh, trying to take back control. "Mr. Caldwell, what a surprise. I had no idea my wife had such an interesting story, but I'm sure it must just be a coincidence." Ethan turned and looked at him. Just one brief glance was enough to silence him. Then Ethan looked back at Claire, his voice quieter, slower, as if this was the only question that truly mattered that night. "After all these years, are you happy?" That question caught in Claire's throat. Under the dazzling lights, with the soft music playing and hundreds of eyes fixed on her, she felt more exposed than ever before. "Are you happy?" It was such a gentle, calm question, but it touched the exact place she had spent years trying to hide. Claire did not answer right away. She simply pressed her lips together, as if loosening even a little would make every buried hurt spill out in front of the entire room. Daniel jumped in almost instantly, too fast, almost desperate. He placed a hand on his wife's back, the gesture appearing affectionate, but in truth it was only another form of control. "Of course she's happy," he said smoothly, as though he had rehearsed it. "We have a very good life. I think Claire is just overwhelmed that you still remember her after all these years." Claire remained silent, but somehow, that silence said more than any answer could have. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. He did not push, and he did not ask again, but something in his eyes changed. A few minutes earlier, he had looked like a man moved by finding the person who once saved his life. Now there was something else there. Understanding. He saw Claire's hands trembling slightly as she held them tight. He saw the fragile smile she was forcing onto her face, and he saw the way Daniel kept answering for her, as if her voice had never really belonged to her at all. Just then, the host stepped onto the stage and invited everyone to take their seats for the chairman's speech. Daniel immediately let out a quiet breath, as if he had escaped a dangerous moment. He bowed politely to Ethan, pulled himself back together, and gently guided Claire toward their table. But as she turned away, Claire could still feel Ethan's eyes following her. She did not yet know why he had asked that question. She did not yet know where this reunion would lead. But deep inside, Claire understood one thing with painful clarity. Ethan Caldwell had seen the truth she had hidden for 25 years in only a few short minutes, and somehow, she knew he was not going to let it go. Daniel, on the other hand, had no idea that just as he thought he had regained control, fate had already begun turning in a completely different direction. Once everyone was seated around the elegant white-covered tables, Daniel quickly returned to his usual confident self. He lifted his glass, smiled at the senior executives around him, and casually reminded them of his contributions to the company, as though afraid someone might forget. To everyone there, Daniel still looked like a rising star, the man who had helped expand the company's operations, reduce costs, and build the logistics system that had been praised for years. He talked about numbers, strategies, and the crises he had personally handled, all in a calm, convincing voice. Beside him, Claire sat in silence, almost blending into her chair. But on the other side of the room, Ethan Caldwell was no longer watching Daniel with admiration. He sat very still, one hand resting on the arm of his chair, the other slowly turning his glass, his expression unreadable. Yet inside his mind, memories and pieces of old records were connecting faster and faster. The name Harper, Claire's face, and then another name from documents he had reviewed weeks earlier while auditing the corporation after the acquisition. Michael Harper. Ethan remembered clearly. A few weeks ago, While re-examining the foundational projects that had helped the company rise, he had sensed something was wrong. The original design of the logistics system had once been saved under a different name before that name was replaced in the official internal release. And it had happened more than once. There were deleted emails, edited file versions, technical notes that seemed deliberately altered to erase the traces of the true creator. At the time, Ethan had not drawn a final conclusion, but now, as he watched Daniel confidently take credit for everything, while Claire sat beside him with the last name Harper and the silence of someone who had lived with loss for years, Ethan's suspicions began to form one clear line. Daniel still had no idea he was being watched. He grew more animated with every word, even leaning toward the guests at his table to boast that the new chairman would surely reward him with an even higher position soon. Claire heard every word, but all she felt was a growing coldness inside her, because she knew exactly what Daniel meant every time he spoke about the greatest achievement of his life. It always brought back another painful memory: her brilliant older brother, who had stayed awake night after night over blueprints and operating models, believing he was on the verge of changing the company's future. And in that moment, Claire realized that Ethan had not just remembered her. He was beginning to uncover a truth Daniel had buried for years. The formal speech began to the sound of polite applause. The lights dimmed and focused on the stage, where Ethan Caldwell stepped up to the podium with calm authority. He did not waste time on the usual empty pleasantries everyone expected. After a few short remarks about the future of the corporation, he paused and looked across the ballroom as if weighing an important decision. The entire room fell silent. Then he said something that changed the atmosphere instantly. "Before I speak about the road ahead, there is something from the past that needs to be made right. A truth that has carried the wrong name for far too long." Daniel, halfway through raising his glass, froze. Claire looked up at the stage, her heart pounding so hard it was almost painful. Ethan signaled to the technical team. Seconds later, the massive screen behind him lit up with old system blueprints, early operating diagrams, and internal documents from years ago. At first, some guests did not understand what they were seeing, but then Ethan began turning page after page, like a man who had been preparing for this moment for a very long time. "For years," he said, his voice deep and clear, "everyone has believed that the logistics platform that transformed this company was the work of Daniel Brooks." Daniel went rigid. The smile disappeared from his face. "But after reviewing the original files, archived emails, and the earliest versions of the technical documents, I found another name appearing from the very first design all the way through the core operating structure." Ethan paused for exactly one beat, then read the name slowly, clearly. "Michael Harper." A wave of whispers rushed through the ballroom. Claire went completely numb. Hearing her brother's name spoken aloud in that glittering room felt like someone tearing open a wound that had scarred over but never truly healed. She could no longer hear the whispers around her. All she felt was the tightness in her throat. Daniel half rose from his chair as if to protest, but Ethan lifted a hand and stopped him. "This is not speculation," Ethan said, his tone colder now. "This is the truth, supported by original records, edit histories, and evidence that cannot be denied. The man who built that system was not Daniel Brooks." Then Ethan looked directly at Claire, his expression stern but filled with respect. "The person who deserves to be named tonight is Michael Harper." The moment he said those words, the entire ballroom seemed to explode in shock. Whispers spread from table to table, quiet at first, then growing into a wave of disbelief that could not be contained. Every eye turned toward Daniel Brooks, the man who, only minutes earlier, had been sitting there full of pride, certain that the company's future was in his hands. Now his face had gone pale. His fingers tightened so hard around his glass that his knuckles turned white. "This is ridiculous," Daniel snapped, rising to his feet. He tried to keep his voice calm, but the panic was already showing. "Those old documents can be misunderstood. Michael and I worked together. He contributed a small part. I was the one who completed it, implemented it, and turned it into a real operating system." But Ethan did not flinch. He signaled again, and more evidence appeared on the screen. Internal emails, time-stamped design drafts, scanned handwritten notes, even later file versions in which the original author's name had been replaced. Each new line of data hit like a hammer against the polished image Daniel had spent years building. "You didn't complete it," Ethan said, his voice sharp and cold. You stole it. A sharp breath was heard somewhere in the room. Claire sat frozen, her eyes locked on the screen. Everything she had known, suspected, and silently carried for so many years was now being revealed in front of everyone under a light that could no longer be denied. Michael had not been forgotten because he lacked talent. He had been erased. His work had been taken. He had been pushed out of the greatest achievement of his life. Daniel turned sharply toward Claire, as if hoping to find support in her eyes, a word of defense, or at least the silence he had always relied on. But this time Claire did not lower her gaze. She looked straight back at him, calm and cold. And in that silence, Daniel realized the most terrible thing of all. He had truly lost control. Then Ethan delivered the final blow, firm and merciless. Effective immediately, Daniel Brooks is terminated from all positions within this corporation. The entire room fell silent. Daniel stood frozen, as if all the strength had been drained from him at once. And Claire knew that this night was only the beginning of the downfall of a man who had spent far too long living off the lives and the silence of others. While the ballroom was still trapped in shock, Ethan Caldwell spoke again, slowly, but with enough weight to keep every eye fixed on him. He said that tonight was not only about exposing a lie, but also about restoring honor to those who had been forgotten for far too long. Then, in the complete silence of the room, Ethan turned and looked directly at Claire Harper. "There is one more person who deserves to be named," he said. "If it weren't for her, I might not even be alive to stand here tonight." The ballroom stirred again. Claire froze as every eye turned toward her. Ethan stepped down from the stage, walked to her table, and with a rare and unmistakable sincerity, he told the story of years ago. A young nurse who had ignored rules, pressure, and the indifference of others to save the life of a stranger no one wanted to take responsibility for. That woman was Claire. The whole atmosphere changed. The woman who had spent the evening as a shadow behind her husband suddenly became the center of the room. But this time, Claire was not afraid. When Ethan extended his hand toward her, as if inviting her to step into the light, she understood that after so many years of silence, the truth had finally spoken her name. After the gala, Claire Harper never returned to her old life. She looked at Daniel Brooks one last time with calm in her eyes, no fear, no submission, none of the quiet endurance that had defined the last 25 years. Once the truth had been exposed in front of everyone, Claire understood that there was no reason left to remain in a marriage built on control, disrespect, and lies. She filed for divorce, left the house that had kept her trapped in silence, and for the first time in many years, Claire chose to live for herself, instead of as a shadow in someone else's life. In the final days of the story, Claire Harper returned to her old hospital not as a broken woman, but as someone who had walked through pain and found herself again. She stood by a glass window, watching the young nurses moving quickly through the hallway, and then she smiled softly and said, "For years, I thought silence was the only way to keep the peace. But all that silence did was help the wrong grow stronger, while I grew smaller. From today on, I will not live just to be accepted. I will live to be worthy of myself." And that is the greatest lesson this story gives its audience. Do not let fear, privichka enduring pain, or love placed in the wrong person turn you into a shadow in your own life. The truth may come late, justice may take time, but the moment you find the courage to step out of silence, life still gives you the chance to begin again. Nếu bạn muốn, tôi có thể làm tiếp cho bạn một bản English polished hơn, theo kiểu voiceover YouTube, nghe dramatic, emotional, and native hơn để đọc lên cuốn hơn.